Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you. Josh's severe weather. And we've got an area in the tropics over Florida that has the potential to develop here in the next couple of days into potentially our first tropical depression or maybe even low end storm of the year. And we're going to be tracking that as well as a couple of other potential systems that may impact the Gulf region here over the next couple of weeks. As expected, this Atlantic hurricane season is expected to be a very active one. The beginning and ends of the seasons are the two that are the biggest pain in the butt to try to forecast for. Just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of wind shear, a lot of areas close to land that are interacting with land. But what I'm going to do is do my best to kind of break down the impact that portions of the South and the Gulf region are going to have. We're also going to take a look at severe weather over the next few days in the Midwest and shifting into the Northeast at the end of the week. And then our first big heat wave of the season for next week in the Central and Eastern United States. So this video is going to cover all of that in a technical format, but I appreciate your time today. Let's take a look at where our tropical systems are potentially going to be developing and where the threats are to see these track. The first system is now designated Invest 90L. Let me get myself out of the way here. And it is actually moving across Pinellas County, Florida right now, tracking across central Florida, and is expected to have a window where it may try to develop into a weak system here east of Florida and close to the Carolinas here at the end of the week. Obviously, it is producing a ton of rain across Florida, and that is the biggest impact. The wind on this will not be an impact. Whether or not it gets a name is still kind of difficult to say, but the damage has already been done. In Sarasota and Manatee counties, extremely heavy rain fell yesterday with rates close to 4 inches per hour, causing flooding in the Sarasota area, maybe into the Bradenton area as well. So whether or not it gets a name, it's certainly producing the rain. Oh, and that rhymes too. We also have a system that is potentially going to be forming out of the Central American gyre this weekend on the Pacific side, and models indicate that's going to try to enter the southwestern Gulf next week, and something we may have to keep an eye on across Mexico and Texas, with moisture spreading all the way up into Louisiana. There is some rumblings on the models later in the next couple of weeks of maybe some development in the Western Caribbean and potentially some impact for the Northwest Caribbean, Cuba, maybe even eventually the Gulf of Mexico after that. But the farther out we get into time, the less certain that becomes. I will talk about it a little bit, though, at this point. So you've seen it multiple times here, but the Gulf of Mexico remains well above average. We see anomalies that are as much as 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above the average. So temperatures in the Gulf are more representative of what we would get into during the peak of hurricane season. And so systems like this do have a chance to develop a lot more quickly. Overall, the Gulf is running almost 1.4 degrees Celsius above the norm for this time of the year, at least above the 30-year average, which is a sliding number, by the way. But it is not cooling off anytime soon. It continues to outpace the average here, which obviously is of concern. But I did want to show you this tweet from Michael Ferragamo. We do not typically get a lot of hurricanes in June hitting the U.S. Over the last 173 years, since 1851, we've only had 19 hurricanes. So it takes one every 7 or 8 years, maybe, to hit the United States. It certainly is possible, but we're talking 19 hurricanes out of the last 130 some years. So the percentage is below 10%, actually about 6%. I'm trying to do math in my head, but really the only notable one was Hurricane Audrey here, which hit in 1957 in far southwest Louisiana, clipping southeast Texas as well. You can see kind of two clusters of areas, one Florida and the other the Western Gulf. Nothing across the Central Gulf from New Orleans over to Panama City. So if something were to form and try to become a hurricane, more than likely it's either going to be affecting Florida or it's going to be impacting Texas. I'm not saying that's going to happen. It would be pretty rare, but that is kind of the climatology that we're looking at. Despite the fact that water temperatures right now are running hot, it just isn't super likely to see something like this. More than likely, we are going to see these sloppy, disorganized systems that try to spin up and steal a name at the very last minute. And that's kind of what we're talking about for the time being. So right now in the Atlantic, we do have an area circled. This is Invest AL 90. It's centered over Central Florida, and it's got about a 10% chance of becoming a tropical system between now and Friday morning, and a 20% chance from Friday morning on through the weekend. Regardless of whether or not it steals a name, it is going to continue to dump heavy rain on Florida and draw moisture out of the tropics across the Sunshine State, especially Central and South Florida. Not quite as much for Northern Florida. After that, it looks like it's going to be primarily avoiding land. There will be some moisture clipping the Outer Banks. There'll be moisture heading into Bermuda and maybe clipping the northern Atlantic waters. But really, the damage is being done now, and for the most part, it's already been done across portions of southwestern Florida as this system moves away. So it may get a name after affecting land. So there is some good news from that. On the Pacific side, we also have a situation where we could have something try to form here over the Central American gyre later in the weekend or early next week. So the names on the list, by the way, in the Atlantic would be Alberto. In the Pacific, it's Aletta, A-L-E-T-T-A. So 2A storms are certainly possible here in the next 5 days. And I'm going to talk about where this potentially could go because it may be a player in the Gulf here next week. Across the rest of the world, the tropics are quiet, believe it or not, as warm as the waters are globally. We do not have favorable conditions for storms to form for the time being. That should start to shift, though, here over the next couple of weeks. You can see the feed coming from the Pacific right on up the East Coast here with wet weather centered over Central America, and then some action coming off of Africa that doesn't look too promising. Here's a look at the tropics, the tropical basin, and this is from cyclonicwx.com. And you can see right now our gyre trying to get forming here. There's a bit of a spin right here. Let me change my color because it's conflicting here with the map background. Sorry about that. I thought I had changed it yesterday. Okay, so here's our gyre right now near Central America. This is Mexico right here. You can see a bit of a spin south on the Pacific side here of Guatemala. You can see some flare-ups here over Central America, but this is land-based storms. And just a very active feed of moisture up into the Western Atlantic going right across South Florida. So very active for early June. This is no surprise to me, but what you'll also see is that there's some fast flow coming around this trough here, and that's producing wind shear. That's keeping it very difficult for something to try to form. The rest of the tropics aren't looking super active, but we do have a lot of rain between Africa and the islands. Most of that is dying by the time it hits South America. And over the subtropics, we have a bit of a spin here that doesn't look like it's going to form into anything. So a closer look here for you guys to see. The Gulf of Mexico, still pretty quiet until we get to Florida. We do see a bit of a spin here moving through the Tampa Bay area. That is expected to track across the peninsula in the next 24 hours and might have a chance to try to do something here on the Atlantic side in a couple of days. But right now, very disorganized, just a big rainmaker. We're seeing just incredible amounts of rain here. Over the Caribbean, again, nothing really super disturbing or super, active. We do have some convection, but we just don't have any kind of circulation. The gyre is off the screen here west of Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And we've got kind of high pressure aloft here that's kind of sinking in, bringing pretty warm temperatures to the greater Antilles. We do have some scattered showers trying to blow up into the Windward Islands, but just nothing organized for the time being. That is expected to change, though, over time. And finally, out in the Atlantic, lots of Saharan dust in here, very stable air. We do have some flare-ups of storms, a couple of waves coming across. It's still a bit early in the season to see these try to develop. And the reason why you can kind of see these cloud elements in here, this is westerly flow aloft. And what happens is as these easterly systems hit the westerly winds aloft, they tend to help the system become more disorganized and eventually dissipate. So that's what we're looking at in the Atlantic for the time being. I'm sure we're going to have plenty more to talk about, though, as the months wear on. Here's the Pacific side. And again, I'm sorry if this is kind of difficult to see, but this is Mexico right here, Central America down in here. And we are starting to see kind of a gyre form here. This is a large, broad circulation. It typically happens when the wind shear aloft begins to weaken, tropical moisture deepens, and we start to see what's called divergence aloft, spreading in the atmosphere. And what that does is it allows clouds to form and start to spread out and grow in nature, which would favor tropical development. But right now, the gyre is starting to get going. It's going to be a few days before we see much come from it, but it could produce at a minimum one named storm, maybe even two named storms here. We've got a little bit of time to watch it, though, still. All right, let's take a look at Florida and an interesting feature here. Not a tropical depression, but you can see last night we had this weak low pressure circulation. Winds did gust up to about 35 miles per hour, which in theory should be a tropical storm, but does not really take on the structure of an organized tropical system. Well, this low has now moved inland. It is now to the north of Tampa and expected to kind of track just north of I-4 across the state tonight into tomorrow. A lot of what we call convergence. You've got winds coming out of the southwest, and then here you got winds out of the east, and that has kind of allowed this what we call mesoscale low pressure to form. Because of that, it produced kind of a core rain event here just south of Tampa Bay. We had a lot of rain in Tampa, but even more across Sarasota. If you look here at the radar image from Tampa Bay, you can see just a massive bullseye near Sarasota, basically straddling the line between Manatee and Sarasota counties. I mentioned this yesterday, but there was certainly some extremely heavy rain. Sarasota itself, I think, picked up just over 10 inches, and there was an hour yesterday evening where that rain rate approached 4 inches, which has never been recorded in Sarasota. If you look here at the actual radar estimated values near the coast, whoops, I got a little bit too carried away there. You can see Siesta Key picked up close to a foot. Longboat Key picked up about 8 inches. Sarasota proper, you can see this area where about 10 inches fell, 9 to 10 inches. Again, this is radar estimated. And then right on the coast, I think we did exceed a foot. The radar makes an estimate, so it's not always completely accurate, but you can see, generally speaking, an area here of 6 to 12 inches of rain fell, and a lot of that happened in just a few hours. We're going to see more of it, unfortunately, here today, but I don't think it'll be quite as extreme. Here is our invest. You can see in about 24 hours, it'll be over the Atlantic, and generally speaking, moving well between North Carolina and Bermuda. These are just models showing where the center may go. Here's a kind of some shorter range guidance as well, showing the exact same thing. Pretty tightly tracked here, pretty well behaved, and likely staying over the waters. Intensity forecast on it right now, it's not even close to tropical storm strength. There's a small chance that could happen. If it does, it'll be Friday night into Saturday before some weakening as we hit some cooler waters. But this could sneak in a name, or it could at least be a subtropical or tropical depression. I don't think that's not possible, even though the chances are currently low from the National Hurricane Center. I've seen it go from yellow to a system in no time. It just has to develop a closed circulation and a little bit more convection. And that doesn't happen over Florida today or tonight. That's more likely to happen about a day after it leaves the east coast of Florida. Here you can see that small risk for something to try to spin into a depression, but notice how it does grow. We do have, according to the European guidance, a 60 to 70% chance of some tropical development here by Thursday night or Friday. That might be a little aggressive, but it's higher than what the Hurricane Center is predicting. And you can see if it does become something, more than likely it's halfway between Bermuda and Virginia. So it's over the water and it's happening over the weekend. Now, I do want to turn your attention to two other areas. We do see some potential development here Saturday or Sunday near the Gulf of Tehuantepec or near southern Mexico. The rain is definitely needed down here, but this has a chance where the waters are very warm and the wind shear lessens for something tropical to get going here. By next week, you'll see the general path of this is to the north or northwest into the Western Gulf. There's some outlier solutions that try to pull it all the way up into Beaumont or southwestern Louisiana, but typically speaking, the spread of the guidance has it bending off to the west, maybe towards northeastern Mexico or possibly deep south Texas. There's one other area that models are starting to pick up on, and I'm not talking about a couple of crazy runs of the GFS, although I'll show that in a little bit, but they are starting to show that some sort of a little bit of a spin up in the atmosphere in the Southwest Caribbean could start to form here later next week. And that's something that we may have to watch the week of June 24th over the Northwest Caribbean. But really the two areas of concern are moving away from Florida and then forming over or just south of Mexico and heading into the Gulf next week. Here's a look at the Europeans' operational model. This is a crazy looking graphic, but I want to just circle a few items for you guys here. I am going to change my color again. Green isn't going to work this time. Let's go back to pink. And you can see this is basically valid tomorrow morning. And you can see this spin in the atmosphere. This is a surface trough, but there's a bit of a spin up here moving away from Florida. And generally speaking, it's going to head in this direction. This is Bermuda. This is North Carolina. And we're kind of splitting the two, going over the warmest waters of the Western Atlantic. With time, you'll see how this actually has a chance to kind of organize into more of a closed circulation. This is going to be Friday just after lunch. And you could see by Friday night, Saturday morning may actually have its best chance of becoming a tropical system. It's nowhere near land. It may be close enough to Bermuda to produce some rain there. But you can see it's one of those systems that kind of got going here last night, right over the west coast of Florida, and now is going to try to consolidate over the Gulf Stream waters here Friday into Saturday and then move away. Behind that, we see a ridge of high pressure taking over here in the southeast over the weekend. When we've got a ridge and heat forming, underneath it is where we start to watch for tropical trouble. The ridge hasn't really been strong enough in the southeast in a while here, but it's now starting to build in later this weekend. Underneath it, we now have the opportunity as wind shear lessens for something to try to form here on the southern coast of Mexico. This is Sunday around 4 o'clock Central Time. As we go into next week, you'll see that that gets pulled northward here as this ridge builds northeast and trough moves into the west. There is an opportunity for it to go in between the two into the Western Gulf. This would be next Monday evening, and then this is Tuesday and Wednesday. And depending on the strength of this ridge here, there may be an opportunity for it to try to come north closer to Texas. But if the ridge rebuilds in, it also has a chance of turning back to the left. The European has been pretty much on point with this, turning left towards Mexico next week. But down here, the waters are pretty warm and the wind shear is going to be a lot lower than it has been. So it's not completely out of the question. We have a stronger tropical storm or maybe even a minimal hurricane moving into Mexico here next Wednesday. If I show you guys, oh, by the way, after that, you can see we do have pieces of energy coming up from the Western Caribbean. I don't know how much I trust this one bringing in the Florida, but you can see there's still going to be an opportunity for something to try to form. Now take a look here at the pressure here. And let me take this back in time for you guys here. This is tonight. Sorry for jumping around on everyone, but that's just how this goes. Tomorrow you can see lowering pressure here on the European down to maybe close to tropical storm strength Friday evening, and then getting into the 990s. Probably not fully tropical at this point. It's over cooler water at that point, but it is strengthening. And then you can see here early next week, lowering pressures here in the Bay of Campeche and the southwestern Gulf, and then pressures dropping into the 990s, which would be a strengthening tropical storm here by Wednesday, and we may have a hit on Mexico, potentially. This isn't the only model showing it. If you look at the Canadian, it also shows lowering pressures here in the western Gulf over the weekend. And then next week, you can see, again, a system that's in the mid-990s, which would be tropical storm strength, heading into Mexico Wednesday and Thursday. So if I'm going to gamble on something forming and becoming our first named storm, while there's a chance of something east of Florida, I like our odds a little bit better here with this system in the Western Gulf here on the Canadian. Finally, the GFS, I'll show you guys in just a second here. Let me skip past. Here's the GFS model, which sometimes does pretty well in the shorter term. Sometimes it really gets crazy in the longer term, so I don't put a lot of effort into following it too much, but you can see it's got a weaker low pressure center here, moving over the Western Atlantic, coming closer to Bermuda than what the European showed, but a little bit weaker here. That would be Saturday night. But here's our gyre getting going here over Central America, and you can see low pressure in the Western Gulf on Tuesday. So the Canadian, the European, and the GFS all agree. Doesn't mean they're all right, but they all agree for next Tuesday that we do have something forming here in the Western Gulf. And generally speaking, the push of moisture increases across South Texas. You see these darker colors, higher precipitable water, meaning more moisture. That gets drawn into South Texas, where the rain is going to be a little bit more welcome than, say, Southeast Texas or Louisiana. But as we head into next week, it is trying to spin something up here in the Northwest Caribbean next weekend. And this one model from earlier today says it's going towards Florida, but again, that's just one model. Either way you look at it, the moisture across Florida stays very moist until we get to about early next week. We get a bit of a break, and then it moistens right back up next weekend across Florida. Here's a look at the GFS. I want to show you guys how wildly inconsistent the longer range can be. This is not to scare folks because we've seen scary stuff, but here's the latest GFS, and it's got a tropical storm coming up through western Cuba here next weekend, and then heading right towards the Florida Panhandle, potentially as a hurricane. Again, this is not an official forecast. It is very far off in the future. It is likely going to change. If you take a look here at the model run before it, let me make this just a little bit easier to follow for you guys. There we go. If you look at the model run before it here, let me take this back a bit. This is Friday. You'll see the run before it shows nothing, and then all of a sudden pops something up north of Cuba, but also takes it towards the panhandle. Here's the run before. Whoops. Southwest Florida. So again, targeting Florida. The run before that, really scary, coming up towards Mobile Bay and Mississippi. The run before that, a lot weaker, but again, targeting Western Florida. The run before that says nothing. The run before that says, again, nothing. Run before that says big storm heading towards South Texas. And the run before that, targeting the Central Texas coast. If you go back one more run, nothing. So until we start to see any kind of consistency, we just can't forecast it. I do think something might try to form in the Gulf or in the Caribbean, and maybe that moisture enters the Gulf, but I just don't know yet what's going to happen. If you encounter on social media constant posts about it, that's fine, but just take it with a grain of salt. The chances of something forming aren't super high, but certainly are going to be there. Let's take a look at wind across Florida. We are going to see some gusty winds with these rain showers coming across. Generally speaking, 20 to 30 mile per hour gusts, maybe a little bit more in thunderstorms here off the Space Coast here later tonight. But you will see on this NAM model run, we do start to see some tightening and some stronger wind gusts. The NAM showing 60 to 70 mile an hour gusts in thunderstorms, but they're going to be well off the coast. So that's the good news. Is after the heavy rain, if this develops, the main impacts are going to stay off the coast. Speaking of heavy rain, the HER model, again, crushes parts of South Florida. Don't get too carried away with where the bullseye is, but you can see there'll be some spots that try to get between 3 to 6 more inches here, potentially across Sarasota County, maybe getting down to Punta Gorda and Fort Myers. On the East Coast, we're going to see more heavy rain. This model shows bullseyes of 6 to 8 inches from Broward County all the way up to near Melbourne, with a bullseye near Jupiter to Cuesta about 11 inches. But that's just one model. If you look at the NAM model, it does show some bullseye activity as well on the East Coast here. 6, 7 inches, maybe around Melbourne, that area. 8 inches around Cape Coral, 3 or 4 inches around Fort Myers, 6 inches here, a little bit farther up towards Northport. So we're going to get dumped on again today and tomorrow. Somebody has the potential to see another foot of rain. Really tough to say where that's going to be, but overall, we stay very wet here over the next couple of days in Florida. All right, for the rest of the U.S., heat still in the west. This is eventually going to expand north and east. Flood watch for South Florida. Not a super busy map. Let me make this smaller for you guys. That was a little crazy, but you can see here, this is our water vapor, and you can see big trough here in the northwest. That's going to kick through the northern United States, kind of have another piece of energy out ahead of it. And you can see high pressure ridge here over northern Mexico and the Gulf, producing a pretty good heat dome in here. So all the activity goes up and over that dome here over the next couple of days. Taking a look here at severe weather, we've got a rare enhanced risk for northern Minnesota. So the forested areas near and north and west of Duluth, all the way into northwest Ontario, southeastern Manitoba, have the risk for severe weather. That threat does get all the way down close to Des Moines and Omaha, though, later on this afternoon into tonight. Best chance for tornadoes over the lakes region of Minnesota. Best chance for severe wind extends down into western Wisconsin, northern Iowa, and maybe all the way to Sioux Falls and Sioux City here. The best chance for hail encompasses this entire area, and we could have some major hail late this afternoon into tonight in northern Minnesota, maybe even down to Iowa as well. Tomorrow, the threat for severe weather shifts south into the lower Great Lakes and into the mid-Missouri Valley. Basically anywhere from near Topeka and Kansas City straight through central Illinois, getting up to the Chicagoland area, northern Indiana, northwest Ohio, all the way through Michigan. And there may be some severe weather into southwest Ontario as well. Best tornado risk, personally, I think is going to be south of Chicago, northwest Indiana, central Illinois, but right now a 2% kind of a pickle that's drawn on here. And the threat for severe wind and hail is about the same across this area, 15% or so. Friday, that shifts east. I'll look at the Northeast in a minute. We'll have another system that could produce some severe weather in the plains once again. Nebraska and northern Kansas and northeast Colorado are mainly targeted. In the Northeast, Friday, things could get active. Heavy rain threat, but also severe weather threat. from about Harrisburg and Reading, PA, all the way up to just west of Boston, Nashua, New Hampshire, much of western and central Mass, Connecticut, the Hudson Valley, and North Jersey, getting close to New York City, and we are in that marginal risk, which extends along and south of I-95 into northern and central Delaware, into South Jersey, into northern Virginia, all the way back to about Parkersburg and Mount Pleasant here, or Point Pleasant here in West Virginia. And here's a reason why, real quick. You can see big trough moves across Manitoba here, very fast wind flow over the northern U.S., pinpointing Minnesota as the area to get hit hard. That jet streak continues through the Great Lakes tomorrow and drops down into New England here Friday morning. We've got more fast flow aloft, so things are going to move across pretty quickly here over the northern United States, while our ridge starts to shift eastward into parts of the deep south over the weekend. The heat starts getting broken up in the west here. We're going to see it shifting eastward. We do have to keep an eye on this next system for Saturday, tracking across Nebraska and Iowa. The College World Series in Omaha could be impacted by that. And then looking at the longer range here, we see a ridge building into the eastern U.S. early next week. It's going to get very hot, but we also see this big trough crashing into the west, maybe some mountain snow on Tuesday around the Tetons region here. But look at the wind flow aloft. It is definitely going to set up what could be kind of a ring of fire situation where we have big time storms in the plains and Midwest here by midweek going up and over this ridge. And as we get towards next weekend, it's a little bit uncertain, but the setup is here to see potentially some nasty complexes of storms up and over the ridge, maybe even a derecho of some sort somewhere in Minnesota, Wisconsin, into the Great Lakes, perhaps trying to sneak into the Northeast as well by the 23rd or 24th. More on that in coming days, but let's just focus on the threat at hand for today. You'll see here, oh, sorry about that, got a little trigger happy, but you will see we are going to see multiple waves of storms moving through Minnesota. They'll actually start here across Westman and then cross south of Winnipeg and then move into northern and central Minnesota. This is about 5, 6 o'clock here tonight. Next wave behind it could have severe weather as well. And then things are going to move out tomorrow. Looking farther south and east, we're going to see that severe weather threat increasing today across Minnesota. Take a look at some of these tracks all the way into northern Wisconsin, maybe into the UP of Michigan, and sneaking into Iowa as well later this evening. That'll fall apart tomorrow. There'll be a second push coming across Iowa, northern and central parts of Illinois, into Missouri as well. And definitely a big hail and wind threat here, maybe a few tornadoes as well. And then that will kind of settle as it moves down closer to the Ohio River by Friday morning. And my model doesn't go far enough out, but I will show you the Northeast here Thursday afternoon. Lowering pressures, maybe some stronger storms across Ontario in the afternoon, falling apart in the evening as they cross Quebec into the U.S., but a second wave expected here. This will be mid to late afternoon from central PA right on into western Mass and southern New Hampshire. Be prepared for some severe weather. It should start to fade by the time it gets to the coast in the evening hours on Friday, and then things will quiet down. Take a look at the heat that's going to follow this system here. We're getting hot across Kansas and Colorado on Thursday and Friday, maybe some triple digits. We may see some triple digits down south. The European here typically runs a few degrees too hot, but still we may get close to 100 here over the weekend in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. Next week, very hot across Indiana, Illinois, eastern Missouri, Kentucky. We'll probably see some mid to upper 90s here. And then our cold front will start to drop south here Thursday and Friday. It's not going to make it, though, to the Ohio River. If this is correct, it will get basically repelled and pushed back to the north, and we may have several days of extreme heat over parts of the mid-eastern United States. Here's the rest of the East. Enjoy it now while you can. It's going to start getting hot here. By Friday, we're looking at some low to mid-90s from Philly and from central Maryland down into the Carolinas, maybe some upper 90s in South Carolina and Georgia, pushing 100 in Alabama. And Tallahassee probably also has a risk of some triple digits here on Friday. Saturday will be very hot, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. Sunday, same deal here, still pretty hot. And then the heat starts building north and east for Monday and Tuesday of next week. And yes, that is 100 showing up somewhere around York or Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Again, the European sometimes gets a little bit too hot on the surface temp, but you see that it is coming here. So be prepared for a heat wave here next week across portions of the Midwest and Northeast. Take a look at this here for Thursday next week. Pretty nasty here. We may have some record highs to talk about. I appreciate y'all's time today. Please consider becoming a subscriber if you haven't already. And as always, I thank you, but I give all the glory to God who has gifted me with this ability to share with you weather that's going to impact your lives, but also share with you the good news that God can change your life. Ephesians 2, 8 to 10 says, "For by grace are ye saved through faith, and not that of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them." For grace, we are saved through faith. I think a lot of us try to blame God for things that we can't control. But if we realize in the end that we can't do it alone without God, that he has already gifted us grace, he has gifted us eternal life if we accept Jesus as our Savior, then all we have to do is walk out that faith and let him do all the work for us. We don't just sit back idly and expect things to happen. We do have to actively believe and believe that that gift is coming. And it's something we can't personally prove, but the good works done in the Bible, the book of Acts, the good news that is coming, the belief that if it can happen, it's going to continue to happen is what continues to drive me as a Christian to work hard, to work smart, and to share that good news with folks that need that word of encouragement. I was in a spot before I became a Christian where I just tried to do it all and impress everybody. What I realized was that's a perfectly normal thing to do, by the way, but it wasn't getting me to where I wanted to go. And in the end, it wasn't even going to matter. What was going to matter is that God would reward me with the gift of eternal life. And he can do that for you as well. I don't judge you on your beliefs. Everybody here is welcome, by the way, no matter what you believe. That's just what I personally believe. But I've also been commissioned to share that good news with you because somebody shared it with me. And if they hadn't, we wouldn't even be in this situation. So hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday, and I'll catch up with you soon. If you're in Florida, stay dry. See ya.